The hallway is still here, lockers, classroom doors, the bones of a school built for children who were supposed to grow up in a real town. This is Uranium City, Saskatchewan, a subarctic community that once had thousands of residents, schools, a hospital, stores, and the confidence of a place with a future. Then the date arrives, December 3rd, 1981. That day, El Dorado Nuclear announced its Beaver Lodge uranium operations would close by June 1982. Roughly 850 direct mining jobs were suddenly at risk. In this town, that was not just employment. It was the floor under almost everything. Within months, the anchor was gone. Houses lost buyers. Services lost funding. A modern settlement near Lake Athabasca became stranded infrastructure. This was not a nuclear accident, or an ancient ruin slowly fading away. It was a city built by uranium demand, sustained by one employer, and cut loose when the numbers stopped working. So the question is not just why the mine closed, it is how a town with schools, hospital beds, and streets can die when one employer leaves. Start with the missing payroll, and the town starts to explain itself. At one end was uranium demand. At the other were classrooms, grocery shelves, paychecks, municipal budgets, furnace repairs, flights in and out, and the ordinary confidence that next year would resemble this year. In the middle sat El Dorado Nuclear, a Canadian Crown corporation, and its Beaver Lodge mine system. When the mine was healthy, its payroll moved through everything. Miners paid mortgages and rent, families bought food and winter clothing. Businesses survived because wages kept arriving. Public services depended on a tax base built around the same industrial engine. Uranium City was a civic machine powered by one resource, one major employer, and one market whose prices were set far beyond northern Saskatchewan. In El Dorado's reports, the pressure shows up in colder language: falling uranium prices, expensive operations, declining ore grades, and the cost of running a remote mine town when revenue no longer justified the effort. Once that engine stopped, the failure moved outward, into homes that could not sell, stores with fewer customers, schools with fewer students, and a municipality asked to maintain infrastructure built for thousands with only a fraction of the support. That is why the ruins feel so strange. They are not just leftovers, they are pieces of an economic design that worked only while the mine worked. The town was built in a place where distance was already part of the business model. Uranium City sits near the north shore of Lake Athabasca, in far northwest Saskatchewan, closer in feeling to the subarctic interior than to the province's southern cities. Regina and Saskatoon were distant supply points, separated by forest, lakes, weather, and transport costs that made every ton of material more expensive before it reached the mine. That distance was the problem the town was built to solve. In 1952, Saskatchewan's provincial government founded Uranium City as a service center for the Beaver Lodge area uranium fields. Mines were scattered through the region. El Dorado's Beaver Lodge operation, Gunner, Lorado, and other industrial sites tied into the same northern rush. Workers needed housing. Companies needed offices, storage, repair capacity, roads, docks, air links, fuel, food, medical care, and a place where families could live without each mine becoming its own isolated settlement. So the town became the hub, a planned civic node beside a cluster of mines at the edge of the map. That choice came with a built-in cost. Lumber, machinery, groceries, school supplies, hospital equipment, replacement parts, almost everything had to be hauled long distances through a climate that punished delays and made maintenance permanent. A broken pipe, a damaged generator, or a late fuel shipment was not just an inconvenience. In a place this remote, it could become a system failure. Uranium City was remote by design, and that remoteness meant it could not survive on ordinary small-town economics. It needed a powerful reason to exist every year. For a while, uranium gave it one. In the first decades of the atomic age, Uranium was powerful enough to make that remote math work. Cold War demand, federal involvement through El Dorado, and later optimism around nuclear power tied this corner of northern Saskatchewan to markets and policies far beyond Lake Athabasca. Ore moving out of Beaver Lodge paid wages, filled company housing, justified freight routes, and turned a service settlement into a town that could imagine itself lasting. By the late 1970s, Uranium City had grown to more than 3,000 residents. That number changes the image. This was not a few trailers beside a shaft. It was a community with schools, a hospital, shops, and public spaces built around ordinary expectations. Children walking to class, families buying groceries, workers coming off shift, people planning next year as if next year had already been earned. The industrial landscape reinforced that confidence. Headframes, mills, docks, repair shops, fuel tanks, warehouses, and company offices were heavy, expensive things. They looked like commitments. The town around them looked like proof those commitments would continue. But the same boom that made Uranium City feel permanent also hid the weakness in plain sight. Almost every modern feature that made Uranium City feel secure depended on the same flow of money. Uranium sales into mine payroll, payroll into households, households into stores and municipal services. From the street, it looked like a town with many parts. Underneath, it still had one engine. By the time the street still looked stable, that one engine was already straining. On one side, Uranium City still looked like a northern success story. Classrooms, paychecks, houses, trucks moving between the mine and town. On the other were El Dorado Nuclear's reports, where the future was being reduced to costs, grades, and market conditions. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, the uranium market was no longer giving Beaver Lodge the protection it had during the boom. Prices weakened. For a mine in a cheaper place, that might have meant tightening operations and waiting for better years. But Beaver Lodge was not in a cheap place. Every ton of ore carried the cost of the north. Fuel moved farther. Equipment had to be maintained in a remote climate. Supplies, parts, labor, housing, transport, and winter logistics all cost more. Distance was a bill that arrived every day. The ore was becoming less forgiving too. El Dorado's reports and later summaries point to declining ore grades as part of the pressure. Grade is the difference between rock that pays for itself and rock that asks the company to spend more for less return. When prices fall and grades decline together, the mine has to work harder to stand still. Residents saw physical permanence, schools open, houses occupied, stores serving customers, the hospital still part of daily life. El Dorado saw high operating costs, weakening prices, lower grade ore, and a remote mine complex becoming harder to justify. The collapse was not born from a single bad week or a hidden accident. It was a balance sheet slowly turning against a place built as if the balance sheet would always hold. By 1981, those pressure points were converging on a date the town could not ignore. Then the warning signs became a public deadline. December 3, 1981. El Dorado Nuclear announced that Beaver Lodge would close by June of the following year. Not someday. Not after a long-managed decline. In roughly 6 months, the mine complex that justified Uranium City's existence would begin shutting down. The human scale of that announcement began with about 850 direct mining jobs. In a large city, 850 layoffs can be brutal and still leave other employers, neighborhoods, and tax streams. In Uranium City, those jobs were the central beam holding up the structure. They were paychecks for households, customers for stores, students for schools, patients for the hospital, and tax base for a town built far beyond what a few hundred people could maintain. There was another layer. El Dorado was a crown corporation, a government-owned industrial anchor. For decades, that public anchor had made the town feel less temporary than an ordinary mine camp. When it pulled out, the message was clear. The institution that helped sustain Uranium City no longer believed the mine could carry the cost of the place around it. For residents, Ordinary choices suddenly had dates attached to them. A house was now an asset in a town where buyers were disappearing. A school year became a question of whether a family could stay long enough to finish it. Every plan had to be measured against June 1982. Uranium City did not run out of buildings, streets, classrooms, or hospital rooms. It ran out of the economic reason those things had been built for. Once that payroll disappeared, people could leave faster than the town could shrink. Uranium City had been built for more than 3,000 people. By the end of 1982, historical accounts place it below 500. That is a town losing most of its households in a single year. The first private shock was housing. In a mining town, a home's value depends on the next worker wanting to buy it. After the closure announcement, the next worker was not coming. Families who had spent years building equity were left with property in a place where the market had almost vanished. Then the collapse moved into public life. A municipality collects taxes from people, businesses, and property values. When workers leave, stores lose customers. When stores weaken, commercial taxes shrink. When houses cannot sell, the tax base becomes a shell of what the streets were designed to support. But water lines remained. Roads still had to be cleared. Public buildings still had roofs, boilers, hallways, and heating bills. Schools built around full classrooms faced fewer students. Medical services designed for a regional mining center had to confront a community without the population or revenue that justified them at their old scale. This is how abandonment often works when it is driven by budgets instead of fire or flood. Each service becomes harder to fund, harder to staff, and harder to defend against the next cut. For those who stayed, Uranium City became smaller, more isolated, and harder to maintain. The town was left with infrastructure for thousands and a population of hundreds. Beyond the homes and streets, the mines had left something heavier behind: waste rock, tailings, and industrial sites that could not move away with the workforce. On a map, Uranium City is only one point in a wider mining district. Around Lake Athabasca were names from the same uranium rush: Beaver Lodge, Gunnar, Lorado, and other abandoned northern sites. When the payroll disappeared, those places did not become historical markers. They remained physical landscapes, with mine openings, waste rock piles, tailings areas, contaminated structures, and water systems that still had to be managed. This is where precision matters. The legacy was not a glowing wasteland, and it was not a single dramatic accident. It was the slower problem described in remediation documents: radioactive tailings, metals and other contaminants, unstable or unsafe structures, and the long work of isolating, covering, removing, monitoring, and controlling what earlier mining left exposed. In Saskatchewan, that work became part of Project Cleans, the cleanup of abandoned northern sites, managed through the Saskatchewan Research Council. The language of those reports is plain: decommissioning, waste rock management, tailings covers, contaminated materials, site safety, water monitoring. It is the vocabulary of a bill that lasts longer than the boom that created it. At Gunnar, one major abandoned uranium site on Lake Athabasca, cleanup has been reported at more than 280 million Canadian dollars. That figure gives a sense of what the uranium economy did not settle when the mines closed. A company can shut down an operation in months. Families can leave in weeks. A municipality can lose its tax base almost overnight. But tailings do not follow moving trucks south, and waste rock does not care that the market has changed. So the aftermath of Uranium City was never only empty houses and quiet school corridors. It was also a public remediation system spread across the northern landscape, trying to contain the industrial remains of the same boom that once made the town feel permanent. Seen from here, the empty corridor from the beginning is no longer just an eerie leftover of a town that emptied out. It is the last visible layer of a system that once worked exactly as designed. Uranium demand put the town on the map. Eldorado's payroll turned that map pin into houses, classrooms, stores, roads, taxes, and a future people could plan around. Then the math changed. The reports stopped being paper. Falling prices, expensive northern operations, and weaker ore grades moved into real streets. On December 3, 1981, the decision became public. By June 1982, Beaver Lodge was closing. The jobs disappeared, the population fell, the services thinned out, and a town built for thousands was left with infrastructure it could no longer support. The story did not end when the moving trucks left. The mines, tailings, waste rock, and cleanup accounts kept the boom present long after the boom economy was gone. That is the lesson Uranium City leaves behind. A single industry town can look permanent while the engine is running. It can have schools, a hospital, paved streets, and civic pride. But if all of it depends on one commodity, one employer, and one market staying favorable, permanence is only a condition of the payroll. When that payroll ends, the empire does not vanish all at once. It rusts in place.